Good morning, honorable members. I hope you are well rested and ready for a full day's work of productive deliberations. I am pleased to welcome you back to the second day of the 53rd Plenary Assembly. Just a few reminders to start with. A reminder that the deliberations are interpretations are in all three languages: English on channel 1, French on channel 2, and Portuguese on channel 3. And I also remind members that documents for this assembly are being circulated electronically in the three official languages and are available on the portal, which has been provided by the Secretariat. Brief reminder of the program from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Tourism of the Republic of Tanzania to visit the pavilion outside this conference hall with information about tourism. Honorable members, are there any motions today? Any notices of motion? There being none, I will ask Secretary General, would you please read the first order of the day?
Motion for the adoption of the report of the Standing Committee on Trade, Industry, Finance and Investment on debt ceiling in SADC member states.
Thank you, Secretary General. I now invite the Honorable Dithapelo Keo Rapitse, the Vice Chairman of the Standing Committee on Trade, Industry, Finance and Investment, to move the motion. Honorable, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to move that this plenary assembly do adopt the report of the Standing Committee on Trade, Industry, Finance and Investment on the 53rd Plenary Assembly session of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, laid on the table on 9th May 2023.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Senhor Presidente, bom dia.
Mr. Chair, I'm Ruth Menge from Angola, and I will second the motion that will be presented by the Vice Chair of the committee. Thank you.
Honorable Member, I now call upon the Honorable Keo Rapitse to present the report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished heads of delegations, honorable members, good morning. Mr. President, in accordance with these terms of reference as contained in Rule 42.2 of SADC-PF Rules of Procedure, the Standing Committee on Trade, Industry, Finance and Investment convened. It convened in Johannesburg. I believe this was at Radisson Blu or Tambo on Tuesday, the 9th May 2023, to consider the theme, Parliament's role in legislating for strategic and sensitive assets, taking into account the security of the economy and the SADC citizens, whilst encouraging direct investment. In carrying out this important task, the committee had interfaced with distinguished economists, notably Mr. Pepukai Chivore, former Director, Budget Office in Parliament of Zimbabwe, and Mr. Simon Mtambo, Deputy Director, Budget Office at the National Assembly of Zambia, in sync with the business under review. Mr. President, since honorable members are privy to the contents of the committee's report, I will only comment on a few salient issues that emerged during the deliberations. From the onset, I wish to state that the meeting aimed to address the issue of the debt ceiling and the role of parliamentarians in ensuring responsible borrowing and debt management. The rise in public debt in the SADC region, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, necessitated a closer look at the current debt situation and the need for sustainable limits. Mr. President, honorable members, distinguished delegates, as some honorable members may be aware, Annex 2 of the SADC protocol, the SADC-PF protocol on finance and investment, recognizes that macroeconomic stability is fundamental to economic growth throughout Southern Africa. In this regard, Parliament should adopt policies aimed at fostering constancy in financial management. The Annex advocates that member states strive to avoid increasing their public debt to GDP ratios. Mr. President, it became clear that there is need to relook at the current debt situation in the legislature. If the legislature is to play an active role in cushioning the standard of living for citizens in the SADC region from adverse repercussions associated with the ballooning public debt. Furthermore, Mr. President, the Standing Committee noted the emphasis that was placed on the need to have laws, regulations, and policies that clearly articulate the scientifically proven sustainable limits of external debt. Additionally, Mr. President, the committee learned that the inclusion of the debt ceiling into the model law on public finance management, parliamentary control over debt as a prerogative of the legislative arm of government. The debt limit exists to ensure the power of the purse or the ability to determine government spending remains under the purview of Parliament. The committee further observed that the prerequisites in maintaining sound fiscal discipline include transparency and accountability in the development or formulation of macroeconomic frameworks. More so, there should be a deliberate effort to promote a public finance system that ensures the equitable development of the country, with parliaments playing a more active role in scrutinizing the budget process to ensure that there is effective and equitable use of resources. In view of the foregoing, the committee urges the 53rd Plenary Assembly of the SADC Parliamentary Forum 2, Roman numeral 1, to strengthen their external oversight by establishing and implementing the following measures: independent government bodies like public debt management offices, ensuring cooperation with government agencies, publishing annual reports on compliance, and making use of reports by civil society organizations or think tanks. Roman numeral 2, implore the executive to constantly report on the debt to GDP limit to enhance transparency and allocative efficiency of limited resources in the wake of constrained borrowing. Roman numeral 3, encourage the adoption of uniformity in the legal framework relating to public financial management as part of efforts to maintain economic stability. Adherence to debt limits, therefore, becomes an indicator of fiscal discipline, which is an important element in achieving regional financial stability. Roman numeral 4, call on the legislature to keep close watch on exceptions and safeguards in their legislation. For example, the escape clause, which in some cases results in large deviations from existing rules, making it difficult to quickly return to the existing rules. The meeting noted that these clauses, for example, were prevalent during the COVID-19 era. Roman numeral 5, draw attention to the need to proactively advocate for budget-making legislatures which have the capacity to amend or reject the budget proposals of the executive. This can be done in instances whereby these budgets are not developmental or do not meet the aspirations of the regional citizenry. Member parliaments should move away from budget influencing legislatures whose mandate revolves around amending or rejecting the budget proposals, but lack the capacity to formulate their own independent budgets. Roman numeral 6, urge member states to make a thorough research on countries that have kept the debt to GDP ratio at very low levels. And examples were given, for instance, in the Scandinavia. Roman numeral 7, implore resource-rich countries to leverage on God-given resources to support public expenditure rather than resorting to borrowing. This is evident in the case of Botswana, for instance, which has leverage on its diamonds. Roman numeral 8, encourage member states to develop strengthened transparency and accountability models to ensure that the national cake is not overburdened by imprudent decisions, including over borrowing. This calls for prudent use of resources and careful scrutiny of public expenditure, including an open declaration of accumulation of debt. Numeral 10, direct member states to incorporate provisions on capping debt servicing cost in domesticating the model law on public finance management, as is the case in Namibia, which capped the debt servicing cost to 10% of revenue. Parliament and the executive need to be better structured to reflect the status and the role of Parliament as an institution that exercises oversight over government actions. And Parliament needs to be an active player, not a bystander, in the governance metrics. 11, call on member states to ensure that model law on public finance management makes provisions on seeking parliamentary approval in the event of a windfall, unexpected or unplanned revenue such as special drawing rights, SDRs. Um, 13, urge member states to ensure that stringent clauses are incorporated in agreements on the exploration of mineral resources, including difficult conditions set on yesteryear colonizers who are making a mad rush for resources such as lithium and oil. 14, urge parliaments to be proactive in scrutinizing borrowing aimed for consumptive purposes, including opaque bank loans, which are meant to feed into corruption and corruptive tendencies. 15, and last, direct parliaments to keep watch on potential breach of loan agreements in case of changes in executive management, when new incumbents declare their inability to be held accountable to previous government commitments. There is possible breach of international law in such circumstances. In conclusion, Mr. President, distinguished delegates, let me seize this opportunity to thank the Secretariat and the resource persons for their invaluable support rendered to the committee. Mr. President, I beg to move.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I will now allow the seconder of the motion, the Honourable Ruth Mendes, member of the committee, to present the seconding speech.
Muito obrigada, Senhor Presidente do Fórum Parlamentar da SADC.
Speakers of the member states' parliaments and leaders of delegations, partners of SADC, Secretary General and staff, and member state staff, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, I rise to second the motion moved so eloquently by the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Trade, Industry, Finance and Investment. Let me begin by underscoring the need for parliamentarians to play a critical role in keeping a close watch on the debt ceiling and responsible borrowing in our respective countries. This is quite important if we are to achieve economic stability and development in our member states and our region. As highlighted by the chair, by the committee, the rising public debt in the SADC region, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic in the last few years, necessitated the need for a closer look at the current debt situation and the need to sustainable limits. And a committed appropriation of minds of current debt situation shows that the legislature should play an active role in cushioning the standard of living for citizens in the SADC region from adverse repercussions associated with ballooning public debt. Mr. President, the committee is pleased to note that Annex 2 of the SADC Protocol on Finance and Investment recognizes that macroeconomic stability is fundamental to economic growth throughout Southern Africa. In this regard, Parliament should adopt policies aimed at fostering constancy in financial management. The Annex advocates that member states should strive to avoid increasing their public debt to GDP ratios. Mr. President, unfortunately, the reality of the SADC region is that public debt has been on the spiral mode in most member states. This has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, as I said, and what was also highlighted by, and that associated problems in Eastern Europe, it puts a strain on the member states' capacity to source loan financing at lower rates, thus delaying the countries' capacities to develop and ensure intergenerational equity. I, therefore, wish to join the mover of the motion in strongly calling upon SADC governments to promote budget-making legislatures, nurture transparency and accountability in the governance matrix, avoiding overborrowing, strengthen their internal and external oversight, keep a close watch on exceptions and safeguards in their legislation, constantly report on the debt to GDP limit to enhance transparency and allocative efficiency of limited resources in the wake of constrained borrowing, ensure uniformity in the legal framework relating to public financial management, leverage on natural resources of our countries, which are many, to support public expenditure rather than resorting to borrowing. Benchmark the debt ceiling with countries that have managed to keep their debt at very low levels, to keep watch on potential breach on loan agreements in case of changes in executive management. Mr. President, before I conclude, allow me to commend the Office of the Secretary General of the SADC Parliamentary Forum for the unique and inclusive manner in which the meeting of the Standing Committee of Trade, Industry, Finance and Investment was held. It is gratifying to note that the SADC Parliamentary Forum took advantage of its unique regional position to provide such a platform where experts were asked to share with the committee on and analyze on how the debt ceiling can be managed. As I conclude, allow me to convey my gratitude to the consultants, Honorable Shivore Mtambo, for their well-thought-out presentation. Mr. President, I second the motion without any reservation, and I thank you. Obrigado.
I'd like to say a special word of welcome back to the Honorable Speaker, the Right Honorable Tulia Jackson of Tanzania, whom we greatly missed yesterday. Welcome back, Madam Speaker. I shall now allow debate on the motion. Members are reminded that there is an allocation of 5 minutes per intervention, and you also be reminded to identify yourselves as you take the floor. Please, we will begin with the member from Botswana.
Thank you, Mr. President. This was a very good report. But I acknowledge the report and do commend the committee for tabling this report before the House for deliberation. The report and its recommendations will help member states to implement sustainable measures to ensure that is kept within acceptable levels all the time. Mr. President, member states should have strong financial management measures in place to ensure stability of cash flow in their economies and good management practices. That one, we can really reduce corruption. Parliaments provide good oversight measures over government to ensure that public finance are managed well, and there's accountability for public expenditures, and to ensure that financial controls are efficient. Mr. President, it is important to draw up legal framework which would help member states to ensure that